Amelie here, as well as Ida Rukavina from our office here. We're here what we're calling the Rebuilding Minnesota Tour. It's basically us staff members coming out and visiting different communities here in Minnesota to talk about specifically infrastructure, transportation, housing, and broadband issues. Before I start getting into everything else, could I just go around the room to kind of do introductions? I'll start with...
Sure, I'm Ann Tracy and I work on the Blandon on Broadband blog.
Serge Phillips with Minnesota DOT, the Office of Government Affairs.
John Welly, Aitkin County Engineer.
Jessica Seibert, Aitkin County Administrator.
District 3 Aitkin County Commissioner.
Could I get your name? Sorry.
Don Nemi.
Oh, Don, pleasure.
I didn't want that part.
Okay. Sure.
I'm Stacy Clark with Mille Lacs Energy. I'm a Technology Energy Services Manager here focusing on broadband.
That's it.
Ross Wagner, Aitkin County Economic Development Coordinator.
Okay.
I'm Barbara Carm, the Executive Director for Aitkin County Growth.
Ida Rukavina, Regional Outreach Director for the Senator.
Gary Tibbetts, Mayor, City of Aitkin.
Rich Kudermosh, Land Commissioner, Aitkin.
Exciting. And we're back.
I'm Ann Schwartz with the Newspaper newspaper.
Oh, thank you.
Paul Vold with KKI and Radio.
Thanks for coming.
Lauren Silver, I'm an ambassador. I am a consultant ambassador for the Enbridge. I also do some consulting work in other things, like lobbying and so forth.
Okay.
Bruce Algren, I used to be the mayor of OK for a number of years, and I'm also an ambassador for the parts of Aitkin and Carbon County for Enbridge Network Line 3.
Okay.
Catherine, John Winslow.
I just brought her along.
She brought you.
Or did she bring
Yes, there's the truth of it.
Okay.
All right.
On task.
So to begin things off, to kind of explain it, we actually have a video straight from the senator herself.
Hello to everyone gathered today. Thanks so much for joining my staff for this discussion about some of Greater Minnesota's most pressing transportation, infrastructure, and housing needs. I figure kids that grow up in rural Minnesota should be able to live there. But we need your ideas. It shouldn't just be us talking to you. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives, because whether you're in Pine City, or Brainerd, or Aitkin, Wadena, Walker, or Bemidji, each of you know firsthand how important investments in things like safe roads, bridges, and reliable broadband are for cities and towns in Greater Minnesota to thrive. Today's meeting is an opportunity for you to highlight some of the local initiatives that I've heard bits and pieces about, and I know what good work you're doing, and to share your ideas with us for further improvement. It's going to allow me, when our staff brings it back to me, to use them as examples on the Senate floor, to use them as examples as we fight for funding and moving forward and make sure that we do not leave rural Minnesota and rural America behind. Because as you know, much of our nation's infrastructure is in urgent need of repair. This year, the American Road and Transportation Builders Association found that about 47,000 U.S. bridges are structurally deficient. That is unacceptable. No one knows this better than us. We all remember when that 35W bridge collapsed in the Mississippi River more than a decade ago. On that day, as the eyes of the nation were on us, we came together. And 13 months later, we rebuilt that bridge. But we didn't stop there. In 2015, we made a big step forward when we passed the FAST Act, which authorized $305 billion in funding for highway and motor vehicle safety, public transportation, hazardous material safety, as well as technology programs. I continue to be a strong supporter of flexible competitive grant programs, from build to infra to SIG grants. I know these are critical tools for modernizing our infrastructure. In fact, just last December, I helped secure a $20 billion build grant to reconstruct an interchange in northern Minnesota. That spurs investments. And I think you know about how some of our smaller communities, not as expensive to invest, whether it's an underpass, whether it is a rail overpass, whether it is a bridge that needs to be fixed, or a road. These investments matter to local businesses and encourage economic expansion. I still remember one community where even the street lights were helpful. There's still more we need to do. I want to thank you for focusing on this, for making the case for broadband infrastructure. There is no reason that I should hear stories like yours and the one from Fort Ripley, the student who actually wrote an essay to his local carrier about he had to hold his phone next to one window in his home to try to get a connection to download the information he needed to do his homework. We can do better. That's why I believe we need increased investment as well as an infrastructure financing authority. Those are the kinds of things that we need if we're going to get broadband and we're going to get the kind of help we need in rural America. And we need to make sure that any plan we do has carve-outs and very clear piece of this about rural. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm very excited that we're going to hear from all of you about what's happening with transportation and housing, as well as any other issues you want to raise when it comes to healthcare or other things. Because as I said at the beginning, I believe that kids that grow up in rural Minnesota should be able to live there. Thanks so much. Look forward to hearing about your ideas.
So, I mean, that's basically it from her. That's what we're here to talk about, is those kinds of issues. Kind of the way we usually have been starting these things out is I'm going to give just a quick update of things that our office has been working on in DC, and then we try to facilitate discussion first so we can hear that back from you on those feedback. So on transportation issues, the big thing that we're all looking forward to seeing that's coming this year is the reauthorization of the FAST Act. The Senator was a big supporter of that when it first came out in 2015. We know that it's passed its markups in the Commerce Committees. We're waiting to hear. It's one of those. It's a big bill, and so it requires to go through multiple committees. The EPW committee, I believe, is going to be finishing their markups here in either September or October, and we're still waiting to hear back on the banking committee side of things. But we're fairly confident it's going to go through no problems right before January, because it's something that's going to have to go through this Congress. There's just too many things at stake, and as you heard a little bit from the Senator herself, the big things that we're pushing for is making sure that there is funding in place there for infrastructure, like grants, or either through grants for bridges or through housing, through transportation needs. It's just we're making sure that we're bringing that home here to Minnesota. As far as the broadband pieces of this, the big things that the Senator has been working on is the mapping issue when it comes to actually making sure we're identifying the needs for the communities in Minnesota. Whether it's going to be through specific mapping of different areas and knowing exactly how much of those communities are actually being served, and we have that accurate data, so we can work on providing, providing additional either funding or ways to address those issues, or whether it's focusing on specific issue areas, like she helped build a task force to study agriculture and the effects of broadband with specifically on agriculture issues. And so that's it's at the forefront of her mind on that issue as well. With that, I'm going to actually turn it over for a little bit of a state update with Serge.
Thanks, Kurt. I work for MnDOT out of the St. Paul office at the Capitol. That's our administrative center. We have operations centers around the state. You guys are in Baxter, District 3. There's Baxter office. The ATP's District 1. The DOT's District 3. And that's something we were saying, maybe you can mention to the Senator, that's sort of, usually the ATPs, the Area Transportation Partnerships, match up with the MnDOT districts, but this is one of those little anomalies where there's a little corner of the county which doesn't match up. So I do the federal side, I work with the congressional delegation, and but I can summarize the state session. We had the governor's support increased gas tax, 20 cents per gallon, to go from 28.4 cents per gallon to 48, along with an increase in vehicle registration fee and an increased metro sales tax. It passed the House but failed in the Senate. We estimated highway funding needs are $6 billion outstanding for 10 years and $18 billion for 20 years. So that's the gap we're trying to fill with this revenue proposal, but we will go back to square one. The next hope is on the federal side. Maybe the reauthorization bill will provide that funding, or part of it, at least. The situation with the FAST Act is it's in the last year. It ends in 2020. September of 2020 it finishes, and this FAST Act needed 140 billion. No, starting in fiscal year 2008, the Highway Trust Fund, which is where the federal gas tax goes, it's it's the vehicle to use them, has needed 140 billion in extra money put into it because it hasn't had enough to sustain the programs. So the estimate is when the FAST Act expires in 2020, spending will exceed revenue by 16 billion. So 16 billion, Congress has to come up with that sometime around October of 2020. If estimates are on course, and they usually update those in January of each year. And they estimate 115 billion is needed for a 6-year bill. The Senate bill that Kurt brought up has some new provisions. One of them is a rural bridge grant program. A lot of money in that for a competitive bridge grant program. It also has a whole section on resiliency to try and come up with strategies to mitigate extreme weather impacts on transportation. So there are some new elements to that bill. As Kurt mentioned, it has to go through the other committees, and then the House is probably working on their own track. I mean, Peter DeFazio's the chairman of that one, Eastern Oregon. We have Angie Craig and Pete Stauber on that committee, one from each party. So that's all I had to give you an update on funding at the state and federal level.
Great. So I'm Rommel with Senator Klobuchar staff. I'm going to give a quick update on housing at the federal level. And actually now is actually a great time to talk about, because we're currently tracking the T-HUD appropriations bill right now that funds a lot of the HUD programming that exists out there. And Senator Klobuchar, she actually sent a letter to both chairs of the committee to express her support for programs such as the HOME program, community development block grants, National Housing Trust Fund as well, among a few others. And last year, in terms of the appropriations that we were able to help support HUD with, include increased funding for LIHTC, the HOME program, some of the other more affordable housing programs that exist out there, Section 8, Section 4, community development block grants, which I've mentioned before. And Senator Klobuchar has also been a consistent supporter of rural housing and rural development projects through USDA, which include rental assistance, home loan assistance, and housing rehab as well. So but with that being said, I know there's still a lot of issues at the local level that you're facing in terms of the housing situation, in terms of affordability, accessibility, availability. So on that note, I think it'd be a good time to turn it over to our discussion and talk a little bit more about transportation. So for the county and municipal representation room, I want to hear a little bit more about sort of the current projects you're working on, current challenges that you're facing in regards to infrastructure transportation.
Well, so as far as local transportation, obviously funding is an issue. Most of our funding comes from the state, although the state has been stalled, as Serge mentioned, in increasing the state gas tax recently as well, and that's due to a number of factors, but I think one of the factors is just the fact that counties were given local option sales tax authority about a decade ago, and a lot of the counties are really utilizing that to address their local transportation needs. It works great if you have a regional center city in your county that you can collect all that sales tax. It doesn't work so great for rural counties like Aitkin that really have no retail, and really there is just not a lot of potential to gain any revenue by passing that local option sales tax. So it's created a bit of a situation, I think, where there's counties that have access to extra money in Minnesota, and then there's those that don't. And we are definitely one of those that don't. Our funding increases, a nominal 1% to 3% a year. That's in comparison to counties that have, doubled and then some their budgets through the local option sales tax. So that's our situation locally. I think maybe the more important thing to talk about, though, is the broader state situation as far as maintaining their highway system, because I think that That is probably the bigger problem. I don't know if anyone drives around the state and compares county roads to state roads. I think by and large, it's a fact that the county roads are in better shape than the state roads, and that's just, that's a function of the state highway system growing. It carries so much traffic, the needs are so great, and the funding just hasn't kept pace. Unlike the counties, the state gets a pretty good portion of their funding from the federal government, and it doesn't take a real smart person to figure out that if you haven't raised the federal gas tax since 1993, that you're going to have a fraction of your purchasing power that you did back then, and that's exactly what MnDOT is facing right now. Their needs are going through the roof, their revenues are flat, and when adjusted for inflation, they're probably declining, and just a huge gap is being created. There are other programs I know that MnDOT has been able to take advantage of, like the state bonding programs, especially the Corridors of Commerce program, even the federal Tiger grants. The problem with those, or I shouldn't say the problem with those, but the reason that those grant programs aren't a replacement for just ongoing sustainable funding is that those projects fund legacy type projects, huge projects, mega type projects. If you look at our needs on our state highway system in our area, it's the 2-lane rural highways, some of them on the National Highway System route, some of them just not even on the National Highway System route, but those are the roads that when MnDOT doesn't have the money to be able to pass along to the districts aren't able to do just basic things like shouldering the roads so it's not unsafe if someone leaves the driving surface, or things like adding a left turn lanes to eliminate the very dangerous maneuvers that happens when you've got a car sitting in a through lane trying to make a left turn lane, and a road with 3,000-4,000 cars a day, all the traffic coming behind it. Some of the very basic things in terms of highway safety aren't able to be done because the districts lack that, just that ongoing funding, that discretionary funding that they can put into those things. And that's really what we're lacking. If you look at our highways, that's what we're lacking. We don't have a mega project that's going to qualify well or point out well through a Tiger grant program, but we have a lot of needs. And I think MnDOT, I don't mean to speak for MnDOT, but I think they certainly would agree that their needs are not at all being met. And I think we are doing a terrible disservice to the public by not funding transportation. I've always said if the public knew just how dangerous and how deficient our main highways are in terms of safety, they may think twice about driving because they are very unsafe. And if you think about it, there probably isn't one of us here that hasn't had a family member or a close friend impacted by either a severe crash or a fatality crash on our highway system. And that's, you look at the numbers of people that get killed every year. It's gone down. We're doing much better with towards zero death, but it's still way too many. And it's still, it still is such a huge impact, and so many of those could be avoided if we just had the normal sustainable funding to be able to address the deficiencies that we have. It should be something that everyone should be able to get behind because it's a user fee. When you go to buy a gallon of gas, you're using the road, so therefore you should pay. It's not really a tax, it's a user fee. It's really no different than if you go to, say, Valley Fair and buy a ticket. You're buying a ticket to ride the rides. It's really no different on our highway system. You go to the pump, you have to pay gas tax. It costs a lot of money to maintain and build that road system, and it's just falling short. The small amount of money that it takes, even a 10 cent, 15 cent, 20 cent gas tax increase, what that translates in at the pump is just small in comparison to the benefits, especially the safety benefits of it, especially in rural Minnesota. Our 2-lane rural highways are the most dangerous highways we have, and we need to fund them so that they're safer for our users.
John made a lot of excellent points. The one thing that kind of struck me is you were talking about the pointing and how the projects point out. It's one of the first things I wrote down when the senator was speaking. She said, quote, she's interested in flexible, competitive grants, and I wrote, can our small rural communities compete? So, if we have needs, and there's always, like John said, these legacy projects out there, will we ever compete for some of those federal dollars?
And those are really good points considering, you know, with public roads and public transportation, those are all public entities that everyone uses and everyone benefits from. And, you know, to your point, that's something that we can hopefully be helpful with is when you're competing for, I think the Tiger grants that you're referring to, John, are now, I think they're converted to build grants is my understanding right now. Build grants that you're applying for, you know, what we can do is we can offer letters of support, so we can reach out. We can have the senator reach out directly to department heads, agency heads, to you know, notify them of, you know, these specific projects that are going on in Minnesota. I know a lot of counties, several counties across the state of Minnesota and cities have utilized that and have contacted us to help kind of lend our hand, just offer that support. I did have one quick question though about the local option sales tax that you brought, John. We were just out in Brainerd and Crow Wing County hearing, so my understanding is basically because they have, you know, they're more of like a resort tourism hub, that they're able to utilize that program a little bit better because they can generate more sales tax. Am I correct in that understanding?
Certainly.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Brainerd Baxter is a regional center city. You know, in addition to Crow Wing County, you've got Cass County, Morrison, Wadena, Aitkin, Mille Lacs, probably even farther than that use Brainerd Baxter as their shopping hub. And of course, they've got all of the retail, and that's where everyone goes. So, you know, it's really created somewhat of an unfair playing field because Crow Wing County is able to fund the local transportation on the back of the region, essentially. Aitkin County doesn't have that option. We could pass a local option sales tax, but what was the number? I think 75 or 80% of the tax generated would come from our small population in Aitkin County. And that's because we don't have a lot of retail that people are going to come to from, you know, from other areas.
That retail service part of the industry part of it as well. Yeah.
And so if you think about that, as far as needing money for transportation, so now we do all of our shopping 30 miles away. You also have 21% of the people who work here travel here because there's not enough housing. So we have zero market rate housing, so we spend more time on the road. At 21% of the Aitkin workers travel more than 25 miles to get to work. And when you have zero market rate housing, then you just increase that need to live outside of the area. So by being able to focus on not only the transportation, because obviously that's what we're losing, figuring out how we can create the housing here in our community is going to cut down on that. And when people live in the area, they also can then have the ability to shop in the area. You don't have, you know, virtually closing because their workers can't find a place to live and they're from rural Brainerd. So, and even when we spoke to a local restaurant, she comes in the morning, she's got 10, 12 cars sitting in her lot because there's not broadband. So there's just another reason why people are leaving their house, sitting in a lot to use the broadband of the local business. So they're all interconnected. If we're going to require people to travel that distance because we can't provide the housing, what least we can do is provide the roads that are safe for them to travel on. But ultimately, what we really want is we want to have a strong retail here so that we can take advantage of the same things that Baxter takes advantage of by people shopping in the area, being able to live where they want to work. So they are all interconnected.
I would say that the interconnected of all these issues is exactly why we wanted to focus the tour on all these kinds of things, because you can't really talk about one without the other. It's exactly a good point. Just before we start moving on to other issues, to refocus a little bit on transportation, one of the things that that's been tossed around is like, you know, would you be interested in, I should say, for grant programs that are specifically like that only small rural communities could compete for, something that would be separate from the big build grant ideas? Is that something that the counties would be interested in, or is that just we want to focus on maybe the flexibility of those, or finding a way to make sure that they do stay competitive in those build grants?
I think if the county hadn't subsidized the broadband, we wouldn't have nearly what we have. So to have some additional support at the state level, to support the counties and the cities on their attempts to try to solve some of the community issues.
Okay.
We have the same problem with the sales tax generation. We just have small numbers. And so, you know, the providers, the Frontiers, the CenturyLinks, they're in the business of getting customers, you know, so they're looking to get more customers, but it's all, you know, market-based. So we run into the same situation. We don't have the strength in numbers to make it worth their while. So the broadband that goes on is for the most part being done through subsidy, state or county. The federal CAF 2 is also a subsidy. The problem is they put the standards so low, at the speeds that it's in, and people are like, where's my broadband? And, I get 2 or 3 calls or emails a month from people, and half of them are people who are in the CAF 2 funding area. They got upgraded, but it's still just not enough to do it, so, yes, we need help, and, you know, looking at the other things, whether it's, coordination, better mapping, I mean, all these things can play into it, because we need help, we need outside help to get broadband throughout our whole county.
You know, if you're talking about something that would help rural communities, the tricky part is, so there's a bill right now, Stauber's office was asking me about, you know, the highway safety program. What if they made a set aside for high-risk rural roads, and they're talking 10–15%? There's something attractive about that, having that money dedicated, but it's not a lot of money. Minnesota only gets like 30 to 40 million a year, the whole state, so it would be 10% of that. I always thought a good solution for that is, I mean, it's related to earmarks, but if we're talking earmarks, if you made earmarks like related to projects in the STIP or related to pavement projects, then the state could spread it around, because every county has a pavement project. And in that way, even though it doesn't target like a rural community, you could definitely have that input and say, what's the one for our county? That's something I'd suggest, but that's only if we get to the earmark discussion.
Well, as you mentioned, spreading it around, one of the things John and I have talked about is, since the lost programs or the wheelage tax were instituted, the funding formulas were not necessarily changed because of that. And so the winners are still winning, just winning more. So maybe it's time to take a look at those funding
Texas
formulas
wants
and
to see it changed.
try to even, I know it's not, I hear it's not popular amongst, you know, obviously the other counties that are benefiting from that probably, you know, wouldn't be very supportive, but for the small rural counties that don't have the same advantages, maybe changing those formulas, it's time to take a look at them.
Okay.
I think it was Serge that mentioned the bridge program, the local bridge program that's currently in place through the federal bill.
Yep.
And that, you know, that is nice. I certainly am not going to speak against that. However, Minnesota, being one of the leaders in the nation in terms of funding our local bridges through our state resources, we just, if you look probably in the last 20 years, we've relied less and less on federal funding to replace our local bridges, and we rely on the state sources much more, simply because we've been so successful, probably dating back to the mid 1990s or early 2000s of convincing the legislature that you know, they need to invest in local bridges. So as a result, we've really been able to invest a lot in our local bridges, and our bridges are in better shape than most states. I'm sure you're gonna find nationwide that that's very popular to continue, because it certainly is not the case in most places. But just, you know, generally speaking, if there are carve-outs or whatever you want to call them for, you know, programs that only smaller rural communities can compete for, yes, that helps us. It still always seems to be the Crow Wing counties, the St. Louis counties, the counties that already have a lot of resources that seem to be able to go after those additional resources, and you know, we're kind of at a disadvantage even that way. But you know, I'm certainly not going to speak against it. It's a good thing. It's a good thing as a whole for the counties, even though it may not benefit each county individually. So.
Okay. Thank you for that.
You got a comment in the back.
Let me give some emphasis to your statement about the speed of the broadband.
Yeah.
I think the federal standard is 25, if I recall right.
That's the state standard.
State standard. It's
10-1.
10-1, that's right.
The state's higher.
Yeah.
State
is
is higher, federal is 10 currently.
And particularly in some of the areas where state grants have been given, like to some of the cooperatives, they're going at the gigabyte. And it really has made a difference in businesses being attractive to that rate. We just need to address and make that standard. When you put the investment in, put it in at a higher standard. there are also, in the broadband area, there will be, and this is kind of a state problem. If a community has some service in broadband, and a community or the outside area of the community does not, the outside area is eligible for state grants, the inside the small town is not. So we have some situations where a business in a city may have broadband service, but it's so slow that they can't access it, particularly with credit cards. And some businesses have the old-fashioned, be able to print the credit card so they can actually run the credit card because their broadband goes up, but they're not eligible for grants. So it's difficult to say unserved or underserved. And unserved becomes before the underserved.
Question has, in some areas up north, I know that, it might be that the providers, that the internet's shut down for a day. I mean, one city, their grocery store will be effectively shut down if the internet in that whole community is down for a day or two. Have you seen that happening around here? Or is that not as?
I related a story to Stacy the other day about one of our restaurants. Out of this service area, they can still take credit cards because their machine is set up to take them. However, if their internet is down, they can't process it. So what happens is invariably it'll go down on a busy weekend. And the reason that's important to them is if it's a bad credit card or a bad debit card, it doesn't come back. So this particular place, a lot of times won't know if all of her credit card charges were accepted until 2 or 3 days later when it runs through the system. And that's the kind of thing. Yeah, it helped you that one time. But I mean, that's the kind of thing. If it's going good in one area, the other area, I mean, for instance, the school has, the state's done a really good job to make sure the schools all have high-speed, internet. The problem is the kid sitting out 2 miles from town can't connect on to the school because it doesn't have the broadband. So those are the kinds of issues that seem to pop up, above and beyond just not having it.
I just speak up. So I'm with Relax Energy, we're co-op, obviously. We just got into broadband, starting in fiber level, and we got a border-to-border grant in 2016. So we're just getting in. So year to date, we've invested like $3.5 million, and then we've had another just over 1.9 million in grants. But we've only passed 1,100 people with that amount of money. So it's expensive to do. So we just need to make sure that those grants are still available out there. This year alone, we've applied for the border-to-border, and we applied for another one through USDA. So that's another $3 million that we're looking for in grants, and then plus the additional investment Relax is doing. And we're member-owned, so we can't go out and spend all this money. We are owned by our members, so we have to take that into account too and keep our rates lower for our electric, so it keeps everything in balance. Something I want to bring up, this is huge for us as a co-op. In 2017, there was a tax law that somehow got through, and I know Senator Klobuchar is on the bill to try to get this fixed this session, but it's an 80-15 rule, so if you have 15% income from non-members, that you will lose our tax exempt status. And I know it's nationwide, this is happening with co-ops everywhere, because everybody's putting in, not everybody, but around the whole country, people are putting in fiber for the co-op. And even if FEMA money, if we were to get that for disasters, that includes as income from non-members. So I just want to make sure that point is pushed and try to make sure it gets that passed, because next year alone, we have over $3 million in grants possibly if we were to get everything. So it would affect our status.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need the laws and the rules to recognize the cooperatives, because we're in Aitkin County, we're served by CenturyLink essentially, and the other half is on Frontier. They service the entire United States, so they got X amount of dollars they're going to put into capital improvements. Where are they going to choose? I mean, they can put that money anywhere. Relax Energy service area is right here. So, I mean, they are going to build, and this isn't the first time where unintended consequences have come up. We're going to do these laws or grants, and we're going to favor the telecoms, but they don't recognize that the telecoms aren't active in all areas.
Yeah. So for when it comes to like serving unmet areas, one of the things that the center has been big on is the dig once kind of a policy, that when you install any kind of new infrastructure, you do everything at the same time, whether it's extending that new fiber or anything like, at the same time that you're rebuilding the road, because the most expensive part of all of this is actually doing the digging piece of it, and it's the most disruptive to everything. Has there been any projects or anything like that where you've been facing difficulties lining up all of those projects at the same time when you're reconstructing something?
We use that all the time.
Okay.
Not to make the argument that there's more money available for broadband than transportation, but to make the point that our investment in broadband and better internet service is far outpacing our investment in highway construction.
Okay.
It used to be that if fiber line went down, it went down in an improved highway where we had bought the right of way. There was no issues with it. Now, and this started probably 4 or 5 years ago, we're getting applications to put fiber optic line on a county state aid highway that's still the original path through the woods that we want to improve someday, that needs to be improved someday, but we haven't had the funding to do it. So, when this first started happening, we really questioned, isn't this really putting the cart before the horse? We're putting this expensive fiber in, knowing that if we ever get transportation funding, it's all gonna have to be dug out, undone. That's a cost to someone. It's not our cost, it's the provider's cost. But it just didn't seem like the right way to do things. But yet, that's exactly what we've done. So we do the best we can to try to minimize the chance that that entire facility is gonna have to be relocated. But I mean, the bottom line is that most of it is gonna have to be. This past year, we've got a couple of highway projects, and it's not funding related, it's permitting related, but we've had permits in from multiple providers wanting to get fiber optic lines into our roads where we had upcoming road projects scheduled, and unfortunately, we've held up those permits for going on, I think, 2 years, third year now, as they want to wait until we get the road improvement done. That's ideal. That doesn't always happen. So more often than not, the lines go in, and we're going to have to work around them in the future. But it really, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it really should emphasize how much our investment in transportation is falling behind when we're putting a state-of-the-art facility into a very primitive area that doesn't have the funding to be able to make it a state-of-the-art facility.
Yeah, since we got back to transportation, does the state have any plan, because of the electric cars, it's only going to get more and more popular, since they don't buy gas, they didn't pay a gas tax, but they're using the highways? Does the state have any idea how the people using electric cars are going to fix their pay for roads?
Yeah, it's at the beginning of that technology. There is talk, other states have added fees for electric vehicles some, but not as much as some other states. But I think more. I mean, you didn't ask this, but electric cars with the battery life they have, most of them are not really a good rural option, right? I mean, so I think that technology, I mean, they're working on it all the time. I mean, the companies are, the battery companies, because this industry is so different. There's the car manufacturers, there's battery, and then where will we have battery charging facilities? We're gonna have to have more of them available, right, whether on the roads or at parking lots. So it's a ways off, I'd say, for a true electrification. I think now we're just, I don't know what the percentage is of the fleet, but it's pretty low, right? Would you say less than 5% or something?
But like Moose Lake is charging station.
Yeah, it's starting, yeah.
They're starting, but it's only gonna get worse in the future.
Worse or better?
Should plan ahead, because we're putting a charging station in right now, we're building it right now, so.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, the whole paradigm will shift. Right now, it's gas stations and repair shops, for internal combustion vehicles. But electric cars are totally different. They're much more simple mechanically. It'll mean more charging stations, more ways to, I mean, someday they've got to get wireless, right? I mean, that technology's not far off, but where you can recharge your battery with wireless. I mean, we can't do it now, but I mean, look what people want from wireless services. You know it's coming. You know someone's working on it. Should work on it. You'll make a boatload of money.
That one of the senators' bills that she worked on too, and I'm not sure if I sent it on to all of the co-ops, but was for research and development on energy storage for renewable energy and specifically the cooperatives and looking at that technology.
Yeah, but we were just talking beforehand. Another part is, where will Minnesota's economy benefit? Do you know what I mean? Like, what part will we have in this electric connected vehicles? That's a big question. We want to have some kind of manufacturing or production. We want to be in on that somehow, but we're still seeing how that works. You can't all be Silicon Valley and Detroit, right? That's not fair.
We've got the cold weather testing.
That's right. Yeah.
So one of the things with broadband, if I could go back to that quickly, that I know the commissioners have talked about a lot when there's local companies getting these grants, and we've done a local grant program to try to help a little bit along, is the frustration when a new line is going in right next to a current line. And so and I'm not sure how the grants work, if there's priority given to putting a line in where it doesn't already exist, but you see that happening often where there's already, one company already has high speed going to these 20 houses, and now someone comes in right behind them and
You need to pass a law like the Phone Act here 20 years ago, where any company, if I'm a phone company and I have my line, I gotta allow you to hook onto it. You gotta pay me a wheelage fee or a wheelage tax, but it's there and everybody can come in. Broadband, for some reason, isn't like that. You can have a company, one side of the highway, and a Century they don't want to breach that line until they get up to Grand Rapids. There's nothing that
A lot
can
of
be
it's
done.
just transport lines, and it doesn't have any, places
Branches.
yeah. So that's what a lot of that's happening, that you see on Highway 47, it's yes.
County Road 12, we had
In 12.
3 fiber optic lines went in on the same stretch of highway in the same year, right next to each other. And yeah, we
I think we're the
asked
only
that
ones
question.
providing, well, yeah,
I mean,
SCI went in and they weren't providing services, just,
There just seems to be a lot of redundancy and just a lot of room for improvements, efficiency, whatever. But I'm not going to say anything about broadband. I kind of chuckled at at Senator Klobuchar's remarks about the child that had to put the phone up to the window to get reception to do their homework. We would have been thrilled if that's all we would have had to do back when the school switched to all online homework. Those were some tough years, and you can pass this story along to Senator Klobuchar if you want, but it became a nightly discussion. The kids would be trying to do their homework. They couldn't get any sort of connection. We'd call the provider. They'd say, well, unfortunately, it's a high-use time. And we'd say, well, when isn't a high-use time? And they'd look and they'd say, well, from about 2:30 in the morning until 5 o'clock is the best time. So we were telling our kids, get up at 2:30 to do your homework. That was honestly the best we could tell them. And we struggled through that for 2 years. And it's better now. It's still not as good as it needs to be. So, we need to improve the connectivity and the connectivity.
Did they ever take you up on it? Did they ever take you up on it?
I'm not sure. We have good grades, so maybe.
We'll definitely make sure to pass that along. I know she's always looking for more stories that humanize sort of the policy behind her, the work, behind her policy work. But just due to time, I want to move on to housing for a little bit before we end our discussion. Are there any other transportation related needs from, the county or that the city wants to bring up, or?
Are there anything on like bike trails or anything that would be part of transportation? The reason I bring that up is yesterday the Cayuna Lakes just opened their brand new section of bike trail from Crosby to Deerwood. And about 3-4 years ago, when Aaron Hounslow was putting together the project, he told me, he said, well, my goal is, he said, we've got some incredible mountain biking in Cayuna right now. And what we need to do, we need to bring Crosby to Deerwood, and that's gonna be our play. And he said, it's gonna take some years for me to get legislative help. And he made it, he got it. He came, called me the next day and said, Gary, you need to bring Aitkin to Deerwood. That's your next step. And that's the phase that we need to look at, because our biggest industry in Aitkin is tourism, and tourism is bikes right now. And we need to connect to Cayuna, which is gonna connect to Brainerd, to Bemidji, to the great, up in the north. And same way, working on the river road goes right through Aitkin. We can take the river road all the way up to like Itasca. So we need to connect, we need to be able to sit down with MnDOT, DNR, the county, and all the players and get a plan, and everybody can say, okay, I think it's 3 years away that we're gonna be able to do this. But we need to have a date, because we need now, where our trails are on the west edge of town, we need now to connect to Deerwood. And that's gotta be our end, because then it can become a hub. You can see, we look at what's happened in Crosby, it's exploded with what's happened with bikes. And we need to be a part of that.
Yeah, I can see.
She's on the, Senator Klobuchar is on the recreational trails program, the RTP, so she supports that and has asked for source of like continual dedicated funding for that, so it continues on every year to year. But I know some of the other areas too are just recently even meeting with the state about their trails and stuff and funding for that. So we were happy to try to figure out whether it's both federal and state and how we can work on that.
And I've had a conversation with Chris from I-4B, and Chris has told me, he said, we have people on our staff that will help. He said, when you get that table set, he said, make sure that we're gonna sit there. Because IRRB can play, if we have MnDOT, we can have DNR, DEED, all the players there. Let's just take a look at, okay, there's A, we wanna get to B. How do we get there? What are we looking at? And how do we make it happen? And is it 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years away? I think people can take a better look at a project and say, okay, 5 years from now, we're gonna be connected to Cayuna. And that's huge right now to get there.
Yeah, I would say also we just saw the senator this May introduced a bill that's actually going to be studying where the appropriate for funding comes for that. It's the Recreational Trails Program Transparency Act. What it's supposed to do is it's actually studying all the non-highway recreational fuel taxes that are administered to the RTP, so that we can actually increase transparency, making sure that we utilize those funds better, so that we can actually do exactly what you're kind of talking about, making sure that our trails programs are getting more utilized, because she knows how important that is exactly to areas like this. So.
I mean, our trail started a number of years ago. Everyone remembers Jim Overstar. Jim Overstar gave us our first kick of money.
Yeah.
That's where we started. And then we've now worked with the DNR. We've got another piece of funding to get into the west side of town. And now, like I say, our next project, we've got to be looking at Deerwood. That's got to be our MD.
Good to track. Thank you.
Can I just say one more thing on transportation before we leave that?
Sure.
I'll be very quick. Anytime we talk about transportation funding, I always try to make the point that it's not all a revenue problem. There's two sides to it. The other side is cost. And unfortunately, the revenue side of it is the side that seems to always dominate the conversation. But there is a cost side to it too. And I guess I would just simply make the point that whatever can be done in terms of reducing our cost of doing business when it comes to transportation, as far as we're concerned, $1 saved is the same as $1 of new revenue. And really that's the situation that counties like Aitkin have been forced into. Since we can't raise enough revenue to get out of, to solve our problems, we have to look on that cost side. We have to do whatever it is to get the maximum bang for that buck. Unfortunately, there's so many times when we run up against state and federal regulations that just, we pull our hair out. Whether it's permitting that delays projects for 2 and 3 years, that increases the cost of a project by 10%. This past year, I know FAA isn't under the transportation bill, but this past year, the Airport Commission wanted to buy a truck with their FAA entitlement funds, and we honestly were not able to because FAA did not have a waiver or a process in place to process a type 1 or 2 waiver, basically to give us a public interest finding to allow us not to comply to the letter of the law with the Buy American requirements. That was very frustrating. We basically weren't able to buy a truck because they didn't have the process. We're not going to have to buy the truck next year when it's going to be 6-7% more. So anything that can happen on the regulatory side, on the cost side to save us money, and I know a lot of stuff has happened. Our energy policy now is helping us. There's other things that are helping us, but anything that can happen on regulatory reform, or just any of those other things related to regulatory, whether it's historical or water quality, archaeological, sort of regulations. Those things have a real impact, and the impact is that we can't do as much with our money as we otherwise could. I'm not saying we need to get rid of those regulations. We all want to protect the environment, the water, everything, but it has to be reasonable, it has to be efficient, and that's unfortunately not always the case.
And please do, too, I mean, if there is, maybe you're not hearing back from one of those departments or something, please contact our office and maybe we can just check in. Not saying we can say, again, not saying what the outcome should be, but hey, where's it at? We know that some of those departments are maybe have a lot of, files sitting on their desks.
Our office, I would argue, specializes a little bit in cutting through red tape, and so that's something we're certainly able to assist with if something like that ever comes up again. Without further ado, though, I do want to give Ronald a chance to talk about housing.
Sure.
For just a moment before we can turn it back to open discussion.
Yeah, but we definitely do have contacts that we work with in almost every sort of federal agency and department that exists on the map right now. So yeah, let us know if there's any sort of those issues, and we can definitely at least look into them. So yeah, I just want to kind of shift gears for the remainder of the time that we have on housing. This question's for the city, county, and folks that work on housing. I just want to have you describe sort of the housing climate out here right now, and what are sort of the needs. I know workforce housing, I'm assuming tourism housing is another need as well for the region. So.
Yeah. So Aitkin County Growth, we're a nonprofit economic development organization. We're self-funded. It's not any kind of state, federal, or we'd love you to give us money, but we do self-fund, and one of the things that we've been working on is a building that we've had for over 30 years and used it for helping businesses kind of expand and grow in our region. We decided that it made sense for us to look at that building and create some housing because of its location. It was in a walkable area, it's near rivers, it's downtown, it's going to improve the downtown landscape. And so we did a housing study with the help of the city, and that housing study, just so you know, $25,000 on the housing study, $200,000 to tear down the building. Needing to have the proper sewer infrastructure needs a sewer study. And so there's just not roadblocks, but a lot of barriers to really creating what you need in order to have the housing that is required for an area. And we have pent-up demand. We need over 350 housing units in this small town. And we have 0% vacancy in market rate housing, and it's been that way for years. So even though there's LIHTC and there's other opportunities for affordable housing, we're just trying to have our workforce not drive 25 miles. We're trying to find them a location right here in our own town, and so that they can go to work and continue to have businesses that are supported by their workforce and they stay here, right in the area. So one of our goals was to create on that space 30 units, which is 10% penetration into what the need is for housing. And so we've got some zoning issues we got to work our way through, which is, just on the government side, how to deal with density. And we're respectful of the fact that we need to wait for that sewer study as well to make sure that they can handle the demand. But ultimately, 350 housing units need to be created in an area that has a lot of wetlands. So when we have land, we have to be smart about the way we use that land, because there's not a lot of buildable areas. We recently sold 215 acres to preserve land along the Mississippi River, which is a great thing with the assistance of the county. We kept 20 acres, and not all of that is buildable. And then as time goes on, it becomes less and less buildable because we have wetlands. So there's also just a need to act and not allow our lands to just sit vacant, because the longer they sit vacant, the more they become wetlands and the less land we have that we can build on. So there is a sense of urgency to make sure that we don't have any kind of governmental regulatory rules in order to access funds. We were pretty disappointed that Onamia's townhomes didn't get built because they couldn't access the funds at the state level for federal housing. They were going to create some townhomes down there. And then next they were going to assist us with some of the housing plans that we wanted in our area. So if they can't access the rural funds, and the reason for it is the way that the requirements are, you have to have public transportation. We've automatically rolled out almost every rural community when your requirement is that there's public transportation available. So you can't have a point system that works against rural communities. You have to recognize that rural communities might take the ATV to work, You know, there's just, we do, you know, there's just not a bus available. So if there's gonna be a point system set up that automatically puts rural communities at a disadvantage, and you just have to be aware of that impact. And we see it in broadband. We see it in all kinds of different ways that we're trying to make a difference in the community. So we really want to just make sure that at the state level and the federal level that it's recognized and supported. Because we do, you know, we're willing to invest our funds into making sure this happens, but we can't have so many regulatory steps that stop us from being able to move forward. You know, we're partners in this, and we've been really lucky to work with the city on the comprehensive, you know, look at the comprehensive plan and see how we fit in that. And so, yeah, just support in whatever way we can to make sure that there's not anything that stops us from getting access to funds. Thankfully, one of the things the first thing I had to do with Ross was write a letter of support for creating an opportunity zone designation for our area, and that happened. And so now we just need to know, is anybody going to support opportunity zone designations in a way that allows us to do the things that need to happen to really take advantage of that designation. So
there's got to be rural communities, bigger, smaller, medium. I mean, we run into discussions before about, well, you know, Brainerd Baxter. You know, we're not at that level or whatever. And, you know, I'll read a turnaround story. Biloxi, Mississippi is a big one, and up in Minnesota, it's Bemidji, and that's great. But, you know, we don't have a four-year college. We don't have I mean, compare Bemidji to Aitkin, a town of 15,000 to 2,000. You know, we just, like Barb said, you know, the transportation, we lose out on points. Well, is that our fault? You know, or is it, you know, maybe it should be recognized that, hey, you know, town under this, these are the amenities that you should have or something.
It's interesting that you brought that up as a point, because I mean, obviously, you don't, you know, that's the issues, you don't have public transportation. At one of our earlier stops where they do have public transportation, they're getting dinged because of like the dustiness of their buses and not recognizing that there's gravel roads in these county areas that the buses are traveling on. They're not gonna be on paved roads, so that was an issue even just for them, so I'm glad that you brought up that point.
And I think we're fortunate in town. We have two developers we have two new housing developments that are kind of starting now, just getting off the ground. One has about 5 new homes, the other one's starting to develop homes. But I mean, that's a housing thing. I think with Barb's 30 units would be incredible for downtown to have that many units. And we have as many new people, new doctors at the hospital, new teachers, new people at the county. They have no place to stay. And when you first come to town, you're gonna want to rent at least for a while. Kind of get a feel of the area and then start looking. And there is 0 rentals right now that you want to live in.
And the other building that we own is right behind it, which we used in the last year for workforce development. So there's just great opportunities to bring people in, get them trained up. Because even though we don't have the post-secondary, we've found some organizations that are willing to work with us so that we can use the broadband that we brought into that building to allow people who don't have it at home to at least come to our building and access those post-secondary classes that they can get certifications, and we'll continue to work on that. But as we've talked to different businesses, they don't do third shifts because they don't have enough workforce. They've got plenty of work, they're good workers, but oh yeah, the child care facility, we jumped on that right away, and then Aitkin Health Services has now got a space that starts on Monday, or just started on Monday. That's open now from 5:30 to 11:30, depending on the number of people who are willing to come. And we'll continue to look at whatever it is that the community wants and try to meet what that need is. But ultimately, there can't be so many expenses to trying to create what we need to create. I mean, it costs $25,000 to do an architectural design, and then to have any kind of change to that is just going to increase that cost once again. And ultimately, you want to just build it. You don't want to spend your money on dreaming about it. We have a piece of property that we've literally spent $100,000 just on engineers for a 20-year period because we had hopes and dreams of creating workforce. We just, at some point, we have to say we're either doing this or we're going to do it somewhere else.
I think the piece that we need to add on to that too and not forget about is not just building the new properties, but taking care of the housing stock that we have. Our rural communities, but we have a lot of older houses housing. And we have a lot of elderly that live in that older housing that can't afford to do the new roofs and the updated septic systems. And we've made 2 attempts at the county to apply for some of the state deed funding for the small cities development grants. And we keep getting denied because our application is not competitive because it's too rural. And they want to use their dollars when they can see the most bang for their buck, which is usually in a city. However, we have areas out in the rural communities that have just as high of a need, but those applications are never going to point high enough. And although counties are allowed to apply for the small cities development grants, if you look at the list of who they're given to, there's rarely a county that it's awarded to. So if we don't take care of the housing stock we have now, all the new housing in the world, isn't going to offset it. And we want to keep, our elderly population wants to stay in their homes. We don't have enough facilities for them all to go to a facility, so it's important that we take care of those homes.
Have people been applying for the USDA rural home improvement, like the individual home ownership?
Yes. I am not sure.
It's the small city development program.
Rural development, has a separate.
It's federal money administered by the state.
But the rural development has a separate home ownership.
Yeah.
You can apply for improvement.
I think you can do something.
I mean, the thing about living here that you probably don't realize is that you can own a home here and you only pay taxes of $455. I mean, if you want to start a business, this is the place to start a business because you can afford to live here, you can afford to run a business here. Nobody else recognizes, and maybe you guys, because you live, when you live here, you don't recognize too what an advantage that is. But what a great job this area has done in keeping the taxes down so that people have a chance to have a quality of life. And the quality of life really is here. We, cleaned up the river, and they had great access to the kayaks. It's lovely, and there's really no reason why we can't allow for more people to enjoy it.
Where were you when I was county assessor?
What do you think?
Can I say something? My other hat, I'm with Habitat for Humanity here, and we get tons of calls from people that need just small repairs on their house, usually anywhere from $500 to $1,500. And also, we will do aging in place. We will help them with the bars and everything. We have the volunteers who will volunteer their time and their mileage. But there's no pool of money. We have to find the money, get it from the homeowner, or go to a charity. So it'd be great to have a little program for just doing small repairs, especially to make people's homes accessible. And also, there's a big demand for roofs, huge demand. I get calls all the time. And if the roof goes, the house goes.
And Brielle did a 9-part series on housing.
Yes, there were 9 articles in the series along with the company followers and I can email that.
That would be great. We can get those later.
That's just very supportive on why we need to be able to support the local businesses.
This has been wonderful. I feel like we could be sitting here talking for hours. Is there anything else that we want to kind of touch base on we left out before we wrap up here today?
I never got to touch on the mapping for broadband. I just
Yes.
want to talk about that. I know you talked about it. Everyone knows it's needed. It's just, we struggle with that too every year. When you do apply for grants, it shows the places are served. We get tons of emails every day. People stopping in, we can't get service here, so just hopefully they figure that out.
Okay, absolutely.
I would just like to say, I grew up, it was after the horse and buggy, but we used to have crank phones in rural Aitkin County, maybe 20 miles from any town. When a crank phone call was a good call. Then they went to dial phones. Everybody got those. I'm probably the most illiterate computer person here today, but I recognize the need, and I believe the thought has to be the high-speed internet. When I hear border to border, that means everybody. That it be treated as a utility. It's that important. It's here, and it's taken me a while to accept that, but I'm there. And so the thought process just has to be that, it can't be a political football. And it can't be just a privileged, populated area has it, and then rural Minnesota, the rural United States is left out of the fold. So I hear this for many years. You probably haven't heard anything here today that you haven't heard before.
No.
The lack of high speed. But how do we get this across that truly we need everybody? I'm there. It took me a while. So it's gotta really be a priority, and I saw it happen with telephones in my time.
And I'm glad that we're here today talking about it, because it is one of Senator Klobuchar's priorities. She does not want to leave rural areas behind. She knows it's affecting, our economic development as well as education. I mean, it's really an important issue to her. So having these meetings will help us in continuing to put that, talking with her and getting more done at the federal level.
And the governor's office too, they've dedicated a person to it, so it's also Governor Waltz, it's a priority for him.
Just quickly, being amongst basically living with the public in my different capacities locally, the most acceptable tax that people are willing to pay, by the way, is a gas tax. It's dedicated for roads. I've been on township government. Well, 95% of township budget is roads. People talk about roads. It really is, to the general public, it's number one. You hear a lot of the other items, but for the average person who doesn't pay a lot of attention to all what else is going around, roads are critical. That is a tax that they are willing to pay if they know that's going to roads. And I've talked, and that should happen. John's spot on. Him and I have been down to talk to legislators in St. Paul. And to be very honest with you right now, it's kind of a political battle. It should not be. So anyway, that I encourage, go forward.
Thank you for that.
Thank you all for choosing to stop here in Aitkin and listen to us. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thank you for hosting us. Yeah, this is.
And then, so we're going to be around for a couple of minutes if you want to just touch base on anything else. But again, thank you all so much for coming. Really, this has been amazing. Thank you that we're bringing all this back to our partners in DC and for this end.
Thank you.
Thank you.